back to music. I've got 3 episodes that I've been sitting on since late September. It's the 3rd of November. The time changed. It's pitch dark outside. I don't know where you stand on daylight savings time. Nah, I'm not getting into it. Anyway, here's an episode I recorded with my lifelong friend, Chad Frederick. We both love this band. I love the idea of doing 101s about bands, picking a band that maybe, people know them only for a small thing in their career, a single album or a couple of albums or a handful of hits. But I posed this one to him. We threw out the name of 2 bands that I wanted him to consider. We're going to do the other one some other time. This one is a band from the 80s. They put out music in the 90s before their lead singer unfortunately passed away. Good looking guy, great voice, some major 80s and early 90s hits, and some songs that you may not have heard that I hadn't heard until I started doing more of a deep dive into their catalog. So without further ado, if you don't know much about INXS, here's an episode with me and my guy Chad, INXS 101 on the Anthony Wherley's podcast. Enjoy. Can't really do it with my glasses on my forehead like that. See it. It's like public speaking, but not entirely public speaking.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
It's not being live streamed. If she makes a mistake, we do it over, but it gets you like that. Perfect transition. I'm sitting here with my lifelong friend, Chad Frederick. There's probably not a single person. I said this, I did a pod back in July with one of my former players and former students who has a very, very diverse taste in music. He loves old country music. He loves the 80s. He and I are connected on Instagram. Instagram is funny because he does the same thing I do, which he posts what he's listening to all the time. So I see what he sees what I'm listening to. I have like 2 or 3 people that I've wanted to get him on here because of that. And I say that in this, his diversity in music is amazing, but you and I have known each other our whole lives. Yep. And we could literally talk about any musical thing at all. Like
the eclectic way that both of us have had like music throughout the entire time we've known each other is probably not normal.
Right.
We have so many different things we've introduced to each other. And
yeah, we could just do one and not even talk about what we're going to talk about on this one or on the one we're going to do after this one. But your dad played such a huge part in the music that you listen to because he listened to a ton of music. For sure. I remember going to stay all night with you and he's listening to like a greatest hits of Deep Purple in that. Was it like a Camaro or what kind of car was that?
No, it was a Monte Carlo.
Yeah. It was like, because he had that, it was like almost a burgundy color, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you had that to where I didn't have it. Like I needed to get my influences of music from my friends or, my friends who had parents who were listening to stuff. Right. And my dad, he didn't have a lot of albums, and what they did have when I was a kid was older country, and it wasn't bad. It wasn't. My dad wasn't listening to Deep Purple's greatest hits in the car.
I was lucky because my dad had an extensive album collection, and it was everything from 60s, 70s, and maybe like even a little bit early 80s. And then I also, we would have Friday night videos or night tracks, so I got a little bit of both. I got all the classic stuff, and then I also got I still kept up with everything that was still going on. I guess for lack of a better way of saying it, that was new and more poppy.
Right.
So I got everything, which was nice.
I was thinking earlier too. Did you have HBO and did you have all that MTV? You had it when
you
didn't have
MTV.
It when it came?
We did have HBO. We were like, it's funny because like we were in Vermont. We were one of the early people to get a VCR, and then also to get like some of the better cable channels because for some reason Dad just wanted, like he was going to spend his money, it was going to be on that. So we had HBO early. Yeah. And then I remember when Jerry finally got HBO, he was so excited, and then he just realized that they played the same movies over and over back then. It wasn't exactly that
Right.
exciting.
Yeah.
all.
Because I said something to him in one of the pods that I thought that he had MTV, but he didn't. So
No,
you
we
didn't either.
No.
Like you weren't
Vermont
getting
never had it.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, they probably did eventually, but no. Yeah, the only time I ever got any exposure to MTV was when I would go visit my mom in Jacksonville, which wasn't that often, but she had MTV, so I spent most of the time when I was there watching that because they showed videos all the time.
So it was Friday Night Videos then, like
Friday Night Videos and then TBS. We had TBS with night tracks is what I would do because I would actually tape, on the VCR night tracks because it would do 6 hours and then it would start over and do the exact same 6 hours again. So I just used to set it on SLP and get the 6 hours and then watch that over the course of the weekend.
Yeah, because living out in the country, it was only Friday Night Videos for me. I didn't have the opportunity to get any of that. It was just basically Friday Night Videos or nothing.
Which was, and Night Tracks was cooler in some ways than Friday Night Videos to me because they somehow did realize that there's a bigger world than just what was the pop. Because, I remember got exposed to, Wall of Voodoo and Psychedelic Furs and stuff like that when I'm only, 10 years old.
Yeah.
Some of it stuck. Some of it was I don't know what the heck this is, and then you move on.
Yeah, and we're talking about all these things that have nothing to do with specifically with the topic that we're going to talk about in this one, but actually, in a way, it does.
Yep.
Because I was thinking, we listened to the radio, and our dear friend Kevin Moon and I were going to do one yesterday, but he was under the weather and didn't get to come over. We're going to do it in a few weeks. We were going to talk about, I won't get into it a lot, but how we got access to the music that we ended up liking.
Right.
And we've been on a Friday Night Videos already, but we were, basically 3 radio stations when we were kids that I can remember. You were listening to YMG, you were listening to WWCT 106, and you were listening to KZ93. Now, maybe there may have been something else that I'm not
sure
thinking
they existed,
of,
but that's
but
all we ever
those are
listened
the
to.
only 3 that I can absolutely remember that we would have been listening to.
Right.
And you weren't getting some of this on some of the music that you might have seen on Night Tracks or Friday Night Videos on those radio stations necessarily.
Right.
And the band we're going to talk about today, and if you haven't listened to the podcast that I did with my friend Matt Rumler, I was walking home from work one day when my truck was in the shop and I was wanting something to listen to in the AirPods on the walk home. And I found a playlist on AC/DC's part of Spotify, and it was called AC/DC 101, which I was like, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Because to me, 101 is you already know the hits, but what are the things that you could listen to that aren't the hits,
Right.
but that are really good? And then you filter that through the prism of where we grew up in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
3 radio stations. We both just said we don't have MTV. We're getting I'm getting what Friday Night Videos gives me and what those 3 radio stations give me.
I'm going to bet when we get into this that it's the same exact song that was exposed us to this band in the first place.
100%.
Before they hit. And then once they hit, it was a very short period. And then we're right back into them not really being known much, which makes the 101 very interesting.
Yeah. And the reason why I picked this one for us, when I was listening to these guys early in the summer, and I thought you and I need to do this because you're the only person I can think of who could do this podcast with me, because we've talked about them through our 20s and whatever. But so today it's INXS 101. And you might be thinking, or you already saw the overlay and what I post, you think of INXS, and what you were just saying, I would have thought of INXS starting with the album that I'm sure you're talking about, and then through maybe a 2 or 3 album period of time, even though there were other songs that you're like, oh, when did I find that? And I was thinking that yesterday when I was listening. I said that before I started recording, that I was listening to them I was being Jerry and doing the active listening on my way to Bloomington to see my daughter to make sure I was on the page that I wanted to be on with this. And
I actually think that most people would only assume, if they even know about INXS very much at all, that they have 3 albums.
Right.
Probably have more, but they only know those 3 albums. They have heard other songs, they don't realize it.
And they automatically go to 1987 and they think of that one.
I mean, that album is by far the biggest. And then the one right before is what I'm talking about. That's the first time I ever heard anything by them was off of that. And then the one after was still pretty big. And then they just kind of sandwiched on the other side.
And so I guess let's get into it. when you do these 101s, when Rumler and I did 101, and it's funny that I talk about that because if there's any other person that I could do a 101 on Stevie Ray Vaughan with, it would be you, because the amount of time that you and I spent listening to Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Talking and listening.
Yeah, at your dad's.
Yep.
I mean, it was...
But I owe that to you, because I was not an SRV fan, not because I wasn't a fan, but because I just hadn't gotten that much exposure until you and I really started going down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, and then we went through a period of time where we were at your dad's after
did.
going to the ranch.
And we got my dad started on it,
Yeah,
too.
we were listening to him all the time. I mean, it was a consistent thing for a while. When Rumler and I did it, though, we kind of just went all over the place. But I think what we're going to do is go a little bit more chronological. And the whole point of this, too, is, I have people that listen to it and send me a message like, hey, yeah, I listened to that because you were talking about it. That's the whole point of this.
Right.
Like, INXS is great.
People don't realize it.
Yeah, they don't. I mean, beyond having this super handsome, awesome lead singer guy who is just the epitome of cool, I mean, it's a good band with a bunch of great songs.
That grew, matured, changed the way their sound was, kind of adapted to what was going on around them. Because again, one thing that people don't stop and think about is that INXS got their biggest album, and then as soon as they're leaving their biggest album, they're heading into, shortly after that, a time period where everything was grunge and harder and more hard-edged and more angsty, and that's not, even though deep down that's what he was, that they didn't come across that way. So they had to adapt again too.
Yeah, the music was getting turned on its ear at the time that they
really
hit.
Just had gotten big.
Yeah,
and
when
so
you stop because when you stop and think about it, when Jerry and I did 1987, Guns N' Roses is at the beginning of where things switched. I know you don't consider them to be grunge, but...
Yeah, but that's the beginning of the end for the hair metal, because even though people tried to lump them in there was something so much more special about them.
And INXS put out their most popular album in 1987. The end of our sophomore year of high school. So we're going to start with their first album, which was self-titled. What's the song or songs off that first one that you have on your list?
Well, funny enough, and I know we'll kind of talk about this, is that I really feel like the beginning, they hadn't figured out what they were or who they were. And so they really, I'm not going to say it's bad, but it's not extremely auditorily pleasurable to listen to that first album. There also was a song that was released before the album called Simple Simon, which was their big first hit in Australia, which kind of got them their deal. It's also not good, in my opinion. It is what it is, but it's not on an album. It was just a single. I like Just Keep Walking well enough. I mean, it was kind of their hit, if you want to call them even having a hit off that album. I like the way that it changes. It's got a very punk feel, but it's not like the rest of the album, which is more punk ska. It's more just kind of punk. Right. But the punk ska is overwhelming on that album to the point where it's hard to listen to. I do like the song Roller Skating, which is, it's funny because that album also, if you go and you listen to it, the songs all truly do say what the song title is in the album, and it tends to say it over and over, which I also found funny. So lyrically, not necessarily Michael or Andrew Ferris's best stuff.
Yeah, I guess the funny thing is we haven't talked about this at all.
No.
Like in some of these, like,
I mean, maybe in code, but never.
Right, yeah, but we never, like, it's on my notes. The first thing I have written down is ska. It sounds just, and if you don't know what ska is.
And bad ska. Like, we're not talking like it's
well-produced,
Mighty Boss Tones type stuff.
Right,
this is bad.
Right, and it's just one of those things where I stop and, I instantly, that's what I thought of. I thought of Madness.
Yeah.
I thought of...
A little more raw.
Again, and I want
which is the punk part, I think.
And goes back to the fact that we grew up in the middle of nowhere, that the only ska that we would have known about then was Madness. Our house in the middle of the street.
Yep.
But when you listen to this album, that's the vibe that you get from it. And you realize maybe they thought, because this is 1980.
Yep.
You thought, maybe the thought was, this is how we're going to make it. We're going to make this kind of music.
It's not far off the time period of Madness, who were huge, by the way. Not in America as big, but huge. And you kind of forget, that Kirk Pingilly, the saxophone / horn guy in the band, he was always a very integral part of the band, and even more at the beginning when you listen to that old stuff. Like, they really focused on horns more than you ever would have dreamt that they focused on horns. Because once you get into the later stuff, it's there, but it's not like that.
Right.
At all.
Yeah. The song that, this first album It's, as the kids would say, it's pretty mid.
It's almost not even quite mid.
Right. Yeah.
And I love INXS.
Yeah. And when you look at this number of streams, like there's not a single one of them. The one that you named, Just Keep Walking, 200,019. You know, that's not a lot.
No.
The one I like is Learn to Smile. It was less ska than some of the others.
I did pay attention to that one. I did mark that down. It wasn't one of my favorite, but it was cool that it was a departure from the rest of the complete over and over.
And I think I put it on my list because it sounded more like what they became, less like what they were trying to figure out, maybe.
Right.
Yeah, the first album, again, 1980, it's kind of hard to believe. And I made a note on my paper. And did you have a bunch of K-Tel records when we were kids?
I had some. I actually had them on tape though.
Oh,
But I didn't have a record player myself, so it was always my dad's. And for some reason, when he bought me the boom box that I got, my first one, it obviously was a tape player. So he never bought me albums. He just always, probably because he didn't want me to touch his record player.
Right.
But he always bought me tapes. So yeah, I had a bunch of K-Tel
Yeah.
stuff.
Well, so the funny thing about that, and the reason why I bring it up is, I had a bunch of them. Like I could probably name I probably named 5, 6 of them I had.
That's funny.
And they were never on it.
Right.
And you're talking early 80s. It's not like, it wasn't like I'm talking late 80s, because I quit getting them by the time we got to high school. And INXS was never on there.
Because I think when we get to what we're talking about, it will make sense.
They would have been on there,
yes,
but they weren't on there early on when they were trying to figure it out.
And about the time they figured it out was about the time that K-Tel records were not quite the thing. Maybe they did have, maybe they were on a K-Tel later, but like you said, you stopped getting them.
Yeah, I think they quit. I think
they stopped making them.
Well, and then in the 2000s or the late 90s, now that's what I call music.
Right.
So if you're listening to this and you're younger, K-Tel records were just basically a greatest hits of all the things that were popular at the time. And they
usually tried to put one or two, I don't want to say like risky, but like a little less known, but a little more out there.
Yep.
But it was usually just your bigger hits.
Yeah, I mean, it was full of Hall & Oates. It was full of Pat Benatar.
It was great.
They were amazing. They were a perfect way to get stuff if you didn't want to buy the whole album. And I made that note next to the first one because it's 80 in the middle of that time when that's a big deal, and they're nowhere to be found.
And I think that plays to, they didn't know who they were yet. They were definitely more punk ska type kids, because that's what they were at the time.
Right.
They were in Australia. They're in Sydney and Melbourne area between the two, like the brothers and then the other members. And so they hadn't hit here at all. The only popularity they had was there. So it makes sense that they hadn't even remotely figured out what they really wanted to be. And it's funny you mentioned, sorry to go off on a tangent. No. It's funny you mentioned about him, the handsome lead singer thing. He wasn't yet. Like, it's funny to look at the old footage. Like, he's weird looking dude, and he hadn't even figured out who he was yet, I don't think.
Yeah, I wonder how old he would have been at the time.
I think, if I remember right, I think they were in their late teens, like right around there. And great thing that when we were doing this and I was looking into everything, Bono, who I know a lot of people have very strange polarizing attitudes about Bono, but him and Michael Hutchence were best friends, and he wrote like Stuck in the Middle about him and all that stuff, and his dumb fly glasses, and he would do all these things and become Bono, as where Michael Hutchence was Michael Hutchence when he woke up and when he went to bed. He was the exact guy that you saw. He was a rock star, just completely frontman all the time. Yeah. Which is probably why, the band had issues from time to time on getting along too. I mean, it's hard. But I just thought that was funny because you see these early things about, especially this like first couple albums, and he didn't exude that confidence at all.
Yeah. So go on to the second album. It was called Under the Colors, and I wrote on my notes, New Wave. Sounded a little bit more, and depending on what you define as new wave, but it was less. I thought it was less ska.
Yes.
That tempo of ska,
equally as not enjoyable, which is funny,
it's not,
especially
right.
being an INXS super fan.
Yeah.
It was almost less enjoyable in some ways to me than the first album, and not because of I mean, I agree with you. I think it was less ska and less repetitive. But yes, they were still trying to find their way, and they went a little more of the way that music was going. But it was like lackluster, and nothing jumped out hardly at all. Like the "Stay Young" was the one song that people actually kind of listened to.
That's 200,000 streams.
It's not wonderful. It's
Right.
fine.
Yeah.
To me, it's like the worst song on their later albums, but it was probably the best song on that album.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just wasn't a big fan of this album either. I know it's like we're supposed to be doing INXS 101. So I guess my lesson for INXS 101 is the first two albums you should listen to because you want to see where they came from, but I definitely don't think that they're what you focus on.
I think the one that you mentioned and on the first one and the one that I mentioned, give those I will say, again, Jerry's talked about being an active listener. I'm a person that puts an AirPod in every morning when I get to work and I'm listening to music. None of the songs in these first two albums, I'm not walking down the hall to go fix someone's computer thinking, wait, what is this again?
And
like
taking my phone out of my
pocket. Yeah.
And I know you and I, the one, even though we have very, very similar like tastes in music and we've always loved music, we love to talk about it. There's one huge difference between the two of us. And we've talked about this before. You are not a lyrics person. I am 100% a lyrics person.
Right.
And again, these first two albums are elementary, rudimentary. Like the lyrics are just not great. And so then that didn't help. When the music is just consistently the same thing over and over and the lyrics don't grab me, it was hard.
Yeah, if you've listened to my podcast, I've said that I'm 100%. The lyrics could be Tony Wherley is a moron, and I would be like, as long as the beat's good, I don't care.
If it's Moby's song, Tony Wherley's a moron, you're like, I got this.
I'm all in on that. I don't pay attention to lyrics for the most part. So yeah, these first two, the song that I wrote down is "Fair Weather Ahead," and when I look at the list, like. Yeah, I mean, the albums, they put this one out a year later.
Right.
So clearly we're just trying to get stuff out.
As they did again after that, too. They were boom, boom, boom music.
Yeah, it was just...
Which is probably why you're thinking the music and the lyrics and everything about it were kind of just like, almost like they didn't really plan real well. Just do it.
Yeah, but if you said if they were kids, they probably... This is what they were doing. The album... Throw some stuff at you.
They finally figured some stuff out. They really did.
And
like you could feel it.
It's crazy because then the next album, the first song on the next album is, I said mid a second ago, the first song on the next album is absolute 100% fire. It's one of the best 80s songs ever, and it's not close. I mean, 3 albums in 3 years, and your first song on your third album is 100% fire.
And we didn't see the video at the time because of where we are.
And I would.
Most people that I've talked to that are either from a bigger city or because I've had some friends that I've met through time where they were big into new wave music. They said, "Oh, when the one thing hit, man, and then, like when Shabu Shaba came out, it was all over MTV." Really? Because I didn't know that.
No, we didn't. And I guarantee I would. Well, I shouldn't guarantee you, but I would assume I know it wasn't on a KTEL record.
No.
Which we've already talked about how that would have been my way of getting it. And was it on KZ93 in Peoria, Illinois, in the middle of nowhere?
No.
I don't know.
Because I think that if I read right, they still really hadn't. Yes, MTV played the one thing, not really anything else off of there. And even though it was a modest hit, they still didn't have a lot of exposure in America yet. It was still pretty much where they were at. But with Shabu Shaba, this album in 1982, it also has arguably my top 3 INXS songs of all time. And the really interesting part about it is, as you just pointed out about the KTEL records, that this stuff wasn't on KTEL. We would have never heard these songs. It has a song on it that they would end with this song, and it's on commercials now. Like I just watched a commercial the other day, and "Don't Change" was the song that was playing. How?
And that right there, that song is the reason we're doing this, to be honest. Because I didn't know what that song was until
the most amazing song,
a handful of years ago. We were watching a movie, and I should slide my laptop closer and Google it. I think it's in the movie Adventureland that
Yes,
has
Don't Change is in that because I have that soundtrack actually.
Yeah, that has Bill Hader in it, right? Like
Yep.
he's like a minor role in it.
Right.
We watched it on Netflix or one of them, and I'm like, wait, what is this? I'm not lying. This was in the last 5 to
Isn't that
7
funny?
years, and this proves my point. Our point. It's that good that like it's 84 million streams ahead of the one thing, which I just said is fire. Yeah.
If you want to say it is.
And Don't Change is ahead of that because of the things you're talking about. Commercials, what I said in a movie.
And I think it goes back to like, I knew that they played it because they played it last and every time but I also have gone on to set list and done that stuff because that's why, Jerry and Joe and I do that. Go to set list website to see. I went back and I looked and they closed with that song on almost 98% of their tours of the whole time. And so every fan that, like the first time I saw them, I didn't know Don't Change. And it came on, and I went with, the first time I saw them at U of I with a couple of guys I knew in Springfield, and he was a big INXS fan, and all I really knew was Kick and a couple of things. And he's like, oh, they're going to end with Don't Change. I'm like, what's that? And he goes, he just looked at me like he wanted to smack me. And then I was smacked by the song, dude. I mean, it was that good. So
yeah, so when we said that, we've talked back and forth before we did this about parameters, blah blah blah, what are hits? I mean, according to Spotify, this is a hit that I didn't know being an 80s kid.
Hilarious.
Within 5 to 7 years ago. So if you haven't listened to Don't Change, you're missing out. Go listen to that song. Like, seriously.
I think INXS takes our parameters and they say screw that because they're a very strange, weird band because they were so big for a very short amount of time when you think about it that some hits we'll get into that were a lot of people, Don't Change is probably one of their biggest songs other than the songs off of Kick that they've ever had. And most people don't know the song other than they're like, oh, I've heard that on a commercial.
Well, what's funny is like when I said that we were on our way to Bloomington yesterday and I was listening to it and I decided to, with Instagram, I'm in Spotify, I can tell it, push this song to my Instagram story. And some of them have like a video that's been put together by Instagram. It's not just a picture. It's not a still of the album cover.
They made their own?
Yeah, it has a video. Like, I don't know if they've made it, but like, I don't know who made it. But you know how popular a song is when it's not just, when your ability isn't just to put this is hilarious because again, in streams. And and here's what Jerry and I talk about, the others. Right. So we just talked about the two superstars. We talked about Shaq and Kobe. Those two are Shaq and Kobe. What are the others?
Who's the Rick Fox?
Right. What are the others?
Well, To Look at You to me is a great song. It doesn't get enough credit. It's a phenomenal song because it was when I felt as you'll get to the later albums, it was that one or two songs on each album where Michael decided to make it more of a ballad, but yet kind of make a different kind of ballad. It wasn't your stereo because he would add the horn and do that. He did that. And then I love the song Jan's. When I finally got all the cassettes and then I started, it's not my favorite of their older, I tried to give the whole album. We do this now. It was still the same foot show that I liked the same stuff.
Soul Mistake. It was one that yesterday when I was doing that again, I was like, oh, that's one I should listen to more often. It was a good one. Sounded more like the INXS that we know. And I mean, I was flipping through and that was one I know that doesn't matter, but I mean, it lets you know whether you're connecting with, there's other people that were like, hey, that's something else too.
And generally speaking, with a band like INXS, since they're not mass liked, the people that are streaming it are people that are like us and truly like INXS.
That's a lot of streams.
And so if enough it goes back to the 500 million Elvis fans can't be wrong. Well, if INXS fans are digging it, maybe you should give it a.
If you haven't listened to that album, you should, beginning and end. I don't know many albums either that punch you in the face song one and then you make it all the way to the end.
Which is like, especially after you have experienced, if you've been with this band since the beginning, you experience INXS, and then Underneath the Colors, and then this, and you're like, oh, wow, my band that I like and that I've liked all along just seriously went all in.
Right.
You know?
The funny thing is before we move on to the next album is one thing over and over and never even knew that. If it wasn't 1 and 2, I'm out.
That's right. I'm done.
If it wasn't 1 or 2, I am out of there.
I also thought that it was cool that it was the last song, because I have this thing where I've always firmly believed that bands do a really smart thing sometimes by putting the coolest song on their album last. It happens more than we realize it.
Right.
And they did it in 1982.
Right.
They loved it, but why last? Other than it kind of gave that, okay, well, we do it last and every tour starting this too. So why was it the last song? I don't, I go like, I think too much about stuff like this, but how did they think that unless they felt what you just said, let's sandwich it with the 2 best songs? You know?
Right.
I don't know.
The best album tangent, the best album last song when the rest of it's really not very good. Life's Been Good from Joe Walsh.
That's the last song on there?
That's the last song on that album.
Yeah, you gotta wonder, like, Joe Walsh, why'd you do it that way?
It is the most mid album, and he put that masterpiece.
That's insane.
His song, the song you know him solo from.
Right.
Last.
That's funny.
Anyway, sorry, go Joe Walsh tangent. Their 4th album called The Swing. I made a note that said, like, sign of what was to come. This is like, I only have 2 listed. The first song on it is fire, just like the one thing is. But like, this album is the one where you knew it was getting ready to change after this one. Why they were getting ready to step on.
Yes, it was starting to tick. You could feel it, and I think they realized it from the last album. And if you go back and watch any videos from it, Michael was starting to change the way that he looked. He was also starting to have a different level of, like, it was getting there. I have 4 songs. I had 4 songs, and I listen to all the time. The 5th one that I was willing to give a try again because fans love it is Dancing on the Jetty. I still don't really like it.
No Sin obviously is the one.
Still weird to me
again,
that it's Dreamways lyrically. That's when I think lyrically.
2 million streams.
Yeah.
That's nothing. Not even close to that. And hit wonder.
Yep.
Album-wise.
I love the actual title of the album, The Swing. The song The Swing is phenomenal. Did you listen to it very closely? Yeah. The way that it comes in is really cool to me, that it's silence and then you have that drum just slowly coming in. I just thought that was
because
really
cool. I thought that it was something that I would remember, and I didn't when I was listening to it yesterday. It's not something that I remember. I thought it would be, and it wasn't. And not that that's a bad thing. It's just I put down Melting in the Sun. Again, stream wise, it's in the middle of the pack of the ones that are on that album. But this album, it's kind of funny because I think it is not a complete step back, but it's not like it's better necessarily than the one before it.
Shabu Shaba had 2 better songs. Original Sin is fire, but the 2 great songs on Shabu Shaba I feel are better than anything on this album. But you're right, it's not a full step back. It was almost like, and there is only, actually it's weird. There's 2 years difference, so they finally take a break, and then they don't capitalize quite yet. It's weird.
And it came out in a rough year.
Yeah,
it's a rough year to be an album in 1984.
100%.
1984. In 1984, you had to bring it if you.
They
wanted
probably
to get
were smart that they still hadn't gotten to where they were the next album yet, because. And we'll talk about it in a second, but that next album to me is phenomenal, and it would have been lost probably in the shuffle.
Yeah, and the next album is their 5th album is an album called Listen Like Thieves.
Yep.
It's the first one that I remember.
Yep.
I remember it.
Well, I was assuming that what you need is the first thing that you and I know.
Yeah, and I know someone.
And the video was cool. It had that stop motion stuff, like aha.
Right. It was way ahead of its time.
And he was cool, and you're like, okay, this is awesome.
Someone that was a year older than us had it on cassette, and not much of a fan they were, but I think at one point I borrowed it, and I clearly never listened to it. I just kept rewinding and listening to the hit. But what you need, I mean, it was
right up there.
Here
with
we are, right?
Said.
Yeah.
Yep. We've arrived.
Yeah, it's every bit as good as the one thing, and don't change in a different way.
Yep.
And definitely the kind of song that gets you noticed and gets people to pay attention to you. And again, what you were just saying about the video, that as well. Like, it was a video you remember.
100%. And I think it led to a little bit, because this was the first time that not only did I hear of them, I still had night tracks at this time, and there were 3 songs that played all the time on there. So it wasn't just this. I mean, you saw this, and then I'll go on, like you saw Listen Like Thieves, the actual self-titled song, which again was a cool video that was more of a post-apocalyptic thing. So they were even going that route. He was always wearing leather. It was not the way they were before. He became a rock star on this album. You could feel it. And then they played, which is arguably my favorite song off of the album, Kiss the Dirt, is phenomenal. And they would play that video, and it was them in the desert, and he was just walking through the desert and kept having outfit changes, because this is 1985, of course, but like that's what you do. But I just remember that video was mesmerizing because of how cool the music mixed with the landscape and the sound and everything that was going on. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm going to really like this band. I hope that they continue going on, which was hilarious. But
the funny thing about it is, I remember the What You Need video. I couldn't tell you, like if you told me describe the Listen Like Thieves video, or you're done, I'd be done, because I don't remember it. And again, I never owned this on CD or on cassette. That person that was in high school ahead of us who had it, I borrowed it. I never listened to it. I know that Listen Like Thieves, at some point, the song came into my, like I heard
your space, right?
Yeah. And then once I had Spotify and I'm going to listen to that. I never heard Kiss the Dirt.
Isn't it just great, though?
No idea.
Yeah.
And that song is fire.
2 more songs.
Fire.
The others, like Kiss the Dirt's probably one of your others. Shine Like It Does.
Fire.
And
Absolute
this time,
fire.
this is the album that,
the
next album is just ridiculous,
never,
but this album was ridiculous as well.
All of the
Look over you.
When you listen to this and you critique my podcasting skills.
It'll be in
those
the
are the
notes.
ones I have listed. And seriously, this time, get out.
It's a Don't Change Me,
Get out.
isn't it? It's like that kind of song.
gosh.
What are the Spotify?
I can't even explain how that is it. And I would have had this in my hands, 8 million, which is a lot.
A lot.
Which is, I mean, it isn't.
Again, it's not on commercials in 2024.
Right. But 8 million,
don't
8
change
million when you're not in a commercial, when you're not on the radio,
and you're never released, and you're never a hit. You're a deep cut to anybody else, but you're, the people that love INXS are like, well, yeah.
Kiss the Dirt, 19 million.
It's a phenomenal song.
Yeah, and
I mean, just
but you said it had a video,
bound.
so it must have got.
Yeah.
So, but I didn't know it.
What? And you wouldn't, and we wouldn't, because we didn't have MTV. I only got it lucky that they would play it on night tracks.
Right. I mean, this is the one that they.
The only other one that I did mention was One by One, which I think is actually a really good song too.
It's
but
later in the album. Yeah.
Pales compared to those.
Yeah, it's just funny that we had that. It's absolute fire.
Go back to Don't Change. As far as what everybody knows, and it was like, well, how do you have a song that good to start the album? And then everybody knew it was what broke them completely. But to me, this time is just as good of a song. Kiss the Dirt is to me as well too.
Yeah, those songs, the 5 that I have listed,
and Shine Like It Does. It's that song I'm talking
Like
about, where he always did 1 or 2. And as we'll get into the next album, I always called them this. He always did a Never Tear Us Apart. He always did one once they started. Yeah. And I didn't realize that he was already doing that.
Yeah.
And he already had figured that out 2 albums before that.
Kick the next album.
Oh my God.
It is what it is. But the others on Listen Like Thieves.
They were Kick level.
And again, I just, I hope if you're someone, again, I know some of my younger former students, former players listen to this and stuff. Guys, go listen to these songs we're talking about.
Don't read about INXS and think, well, this is not something I would like, because I think you're going to regret it.
So go listen to these songs because they're really, really good. The 6th album that they put out came out in 1987. Again, like I said, for you and I, that was the second half of our sophomore year of high school. I was going to turn 16 in March. You were going to turn 16 in September.
We were starting to come into really liking music.
Yeah, and in a different way.
Yeah,
not just a different appreciation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm, exactly.
I wrote masterpiece, because
There's no other word.
it is. I don't, when I do these podcasts, when Jerry and I did 87, I don't remember whether Kick was 1 or 2.
You had it top 2, I know.
I think it was top 2. I don't remember if it was 1, only because I just don't remember. I don't remember them. I could go back and look. It doesn't make any difference, other than I know that it is in the top 3.
It's one of my favorite albums. It would probably be, if we did like a best of the 80s, which is saying something because of the albums that came out in the 80s, it would easily make my top 10
Yeah,
still.
mine too. Yeah,
I don't know where it would fall, but it would be top 10. I mean, it's not Purple Rain, but it's the closest thing to a Purple Rain that is not Prince that you're going to find, honestly.
And you and I laughed, we laughed
we call
earlier in
that,
the week,
yeah.
you compare things to Purple Rain, but I'll say it this way. It has 12 songs on it, and every one of the songs is on my favorite songs ever plaplaylist. Every one of them.
You don't skip one. It's
I
a
don't.
listen.
Yeah, I don't.
There are ones better than others, but it goes back to what we talked about where we're going to do this other podcast about the perfect album. This is a perfect album. Is it Purple Rain? No, but it's a perfect album.
And I think the thing we talked about this earlier in the week, like to say something isn't Purple Rain isn't fair.
No.
It's not fair to compare something to Purple Rain.
Right.
And I would say the funny thing about this is when you said you wouldn't skip anything, the ones that I would skip
Are the ones
the
that are the
hits.
biggest, because I want to hear the other stuff. Yeah.
It goes back to me.
So, do you know what's funny? I even have, like, the boys have listened to a couple of things lately, because I'll just throw Alexa and I'll put stuff on, and I had to laugh because I never say, Alexa, play Need You Tonight. I never say, Alexa, play Devil Inside. It's always Alexa, play Mystify. It's always Alexa, play,
Right.
Tiny Daggers. I want to hear the songs that I remember loving so I can relive that. Yeah.
Yeah, the guy that listens to The Dark Side of the Moon, I listen to the full album Dark Side of the Moon 6 out of 7 days a week, and I'm not lying. I listened to it already today.
That's funny.
I love it. I don't know what has caused that. A year ago, I listened to it to mess with Spotify to see if it actually was
I remember you
accurate.
saying that, right?
And I still do it. And what's the one song I skip? Money.
Yeah.
Money's the song that's
Well, I knew you didn't.
arguably the
It's not that
most
you
popular
hate
song
the
on
song,
it.
but you don't
Right, yeah.
like that
yeah,
song
it's the one.
as
I
much.
don't hate it. It just, it's the one. And again, what you just said, I'm not listening to, I might skip Devil Inside or Need You Tonight, but I'm not skipping on my list. I'm not skipping The Loved One.
Yes.
Nobody knows that unless you're the guy.
And did you read about that a little bit? That's actually like an old 60s song from another band, and they redid it early
know that.
before their first album. And then finally it ended up on an album, and I can't find any like sign of what it originally sounded like, but I can't imagine it was this good because it's phenomenal.
It's insane that you that they would have put that on there, what ended up being their magnum opus,
Right. 100%.
Masterpiece.
So let me tell you a quick story. You probably never watched this, but I watched a really cool interview with Andrew Ferris, which is one of the 3 brothers of the band. That is the keyboard player who also wrote pretty much all the music. I mean, he's the music writer while Michael would write the lyrics. He was sitting in a hotel waiting to go to Hong Kong, which is where Michael was living. And he was in a Melbourne, Australia hotel, waiting for his driver to pick him up. And he was messing around writing a song. Most of Kick had already been done. He's just messing around. And he's like, oh, crap, I need to get this on. So he grabs his 4-track. He's got like the old school stuff still. He's trying to figure it out, trying to get it done. The car pulls up, and he makes them wait. They almost drive off because he just wants to get it on the tape so he can play it for someone, because he knows he's getting ready to meet Michael.
Right.
He gets it on there. He gets there to Hong Kong. He gets and plays it for Michael. Michael says, just a minute. Went in the other room, came back 30 minutes later, and had written Need You Tonight. That's how that song came about. Wasn't on the album, wasn't going to be on Kick. Ends up being on Kick. And then in a dream, Andrew, Mediate was in a dream. He's like, He woke up and had a bunch of like these rhyming words in his head from that. And he had like this mentality. And the video is kind of like what he dreamt. Like people were just throwing words at him. So it ends up being that, which is just insane that album wouldn't even have made the cut because they wrote it right before they were finishing production. And it ends up being their biggest hit probably of all time.
Because that's iconic. That video is, all of that. This
You know
album.
I'm lonely, when he screams like that, it was even funny that they said that because the guy asked like, well, how many, because like that's the kind of thing that ends up getting like recorded a bunch of times. He's like, no, he added all the extra, what I would call Prince-isms, those noises. He added all that stuff on the first take that they didn't even redo it.
it's just
insane.
It's an insane album, and because of, and honestly, like I said, because I think of the others. I mean, we're going to continue. If you listen to these podcasts, it's the others. It's the ones. It's not Shaq and Kobe.
Right.
It's not Jordan and Pippen.
This is a tough album though, dude, because like what are the hits in your mind? Need You Tonight, Devil Inside, Never Tear Us Apart,
New Sensation,
New Sensation. Yeah, Never Tear Us Apart.
Never Tear Us Apart has to be because it was the Sweetheart Dance theme.
True. So Loved One is an other.
It was the Sweetheart Dance theme in 1987 at VIT.
If we picked it, it was big, right? I think Guns in the Sky is another, but it was a pretty big. Like it wasn't like a huge hit, but the video was so badass. Like with them coming through a hallway, and you just keep having different. You didn't never see.
Remember?
It. Oh my god, it was so cool. And then Mystify is probably my favorite song on the album. It's just so good.
I don't. If you've never listened to this album, and again, I say this because of the time I spend with high school kids. Gosh, listen to it. It's so good. It's so good.
Again, they did the name of the album, the song that's also named the same is great. Kick is a great song.
Fire.
Tiny Daggers is phenomenal.
Fire. On my list, I had 3 because I think the others are just so good. Like I said, The Loved One, Wildlife, every time. It's got the least amount of streams.
It's a great song.
And I love it. And Tiny Daggers, like you said.
It's so cool.
Tiny Daggers. You can't see, if I had the cameras going, the sneer I'm making, Tiny Daggers is just so good. It's that sneer. It's funny that Caleb, that I've done other podcasts with, when he'll mention something, because that's why I love him, is he knows his 80s music, and he would, he just graduated now. He's actually in Macomb at Western.
Oh, cool.
And he'd mention something, and I would just give him this sneer. He'd always know that the sneer meant it was that good. Yeah, it's just you can't even. It's so good.
That's funny.
So then we go on to their 7th album, which is called
1990.
X.
Finally, we're finally in the 90s.
Right.
They just had their biggest album. Waited 3 years.
And we're also in the beginnings of when music is changing.
Those two things made this album not be as successful. They waited a little too long after capitalizing on their best album and one of the best albums to ever be released in the 80s, and music was starting to change.
And they wouldn't have known that,
No.
because you think back, and when you're listening to music, and even if you are somewhat younger than what you and I are, we didn't know.
No.
Like in 1990, you and I had been out of high school for 6 months.
Exactly.
And
we had no idea what was coming.
When we stop and think, and this is why, again, you and I could talk. We could do this all day long, and we could make these so long. I can remember my taste changing and what I was buying changing in the fall of 1990.
This is when it started to happen for me too.
Yeah.
Like we were totally just, and I don't even know how much it was changing as it was just growing. The length of what our music was just expanding so much. All the different things we started getting used to and started listening to. It was crazy.
Yeah, because of what we're going to do next. It was changing completely.
Yeah.
Like things were getting ready to be turned on their ear.
I thought INXS did a good job. This is a good album. What's good is good. It's not as deep. It's not as flat out great from start to finish as Kick was. I have a soft spot for harmonica, always have. So Suicide Blonde to me is a pretty badass song, and it kind of changed with. It still had INXS sound, but that it really had a cool feel. And then they really did like the hits. I guess it would be Suicide Blonde, Disappear, and Bitter Tears. Probably the 3. Did you have anything else that you would call a hit?
I would say that you have them. Those are ranked right.
And I'm not sure anything else would be a hit.
Bitter Tears. I have that. It would be Bitter Tears would be 3rd of the ones that you just named, because what'd you say?
Disappear,
which was right.
Those were all, and the cool part was they all 3 had a little bit of a different sound, so they were at least expanding. They were still trying to grow. not all sound the same.
So the Spotify thing that affects it for me, and again, we jokingly say on that goofy app that I own stock in Spotify.
Well, you mention it quite often.
I mention them often.
He's got a Spotify, Coke next to him.
Me and Sean Parker, best bros.
That's right.
The Stairs.
That's my the Others. That's my number one.
The Stairs.
I love that song.
So good.
And it was never a hit. I don't know if it's just because
I don't know. I just like it.
It's great.
I decided to go back and listen to this album. I don't remember when or why, and I'm like automatically favorite songs ever.
The Stairs. Amazing.
By My Side.
Incredible song.
I listen to it all the time. Like I'm sure last year it was on my top 100 of the year.
And that's the Michael, let's make it a slower song, do that on the album. It was phenomenal. He was incredible at making ballads that weren't your stereotypical ballads.
That's 65 million streams right there.
Wow.
On a song that, again, wasn't a hit.
Wasn't a hit, no.
Wasn't a hit.
I don't even know if that one had a video, and that was a time where videos were still huge.
Yeah, because you're talking Total Request live time now.
Right. We're getting into where videos were actually maybe the biggest that they were.
I have
it live, all those things. And videos were, at this point, this is what made a band, sadly. If you looked cool, that's why it was really weird to me that INXS got less popular when at a time where it made sense that they would become more popular.
Yeah, it was. This was when, again, we just said it, but things were changing. Mm-hmm. And if you're younger, and it's funny, you see MTV T-shirts around and stuff, and you have no idea. You have no idea the way things were getting ready. Faith in Each Other.
Good too.
But Cheers, like I said, was the third one
right.
of the three that would be considered hits. I
put Lately on there too. I really enjoyed that song.
It's got 1,700,000.
It's a good tune. It's not By My Side as far as, but it's kind of got that in between, like soft.
Unfortunately, maybe at least for me, marked the end of my paying a lot of attention to it. I know you had it, and I probably borrowed it from you, and I probably ripped the songs off of your disc. But again, we're talking, like you said, 1990. So then we'll go into the 8th album, which is Welcome to Wherever You Are. And I got a good story for this one. But
I wonder if we were like totally different on this one, because I think they went back to being awesome again. I think this is a much better album than X. And they had no hits really off of it. They did. I mean, they had stuff on the radio. They had some videos. The biggest song to me might not have been, I don't know after what Spotify says, but might not have been that big of a hit. And this is when I saw them twice on their tour. And so this album to me was phenomenal. This marks the end of when I stopped thinking that they were phenomenal anymore. And it kind of started to go down a path of maybe not as good a music anymore. But I think a lot of that just coincided with Michael and what he was going through in life. But this album to me is phenomenal. What's your story?
So we're talking 1992, according to Spotify. Plug. Actually, it's not going to tell me at the bottom. Usually it tells when it was released. So here's the deal. In 1982, you're talking the Olympics in Barcelona.
Yep.
And so that means the dream team for those of us that are our age. And in the fall of that year, Mom and Dad went on a vacation, and I bought a 12-pack of Coke that had a CD attached to it that had a single on it, and it had Not Enough Time.
That's the song I'm talking about. How did I not know this?
Yeah,
this is a great story.
And I had a bunch of friends. I had a bunch of people over. Like
that song
I can remember
is fire.
I remember moving my stereo.
Fire.
I moved my stereo downstairs from my room. I had a bunch of friends over, and I'm not sure that Not Enough Time isn't my favorite INXS song.
It's
ever.
It's the first INXS song that I played for my wife to introduce her to the music more, which is weird considering I didn't go into Kick at all. I went to that. The song is beautiful, lyrically, musically. It's that kind of song I'm talking about where he wrote, it's a ballad almost in some ways. It's ominous and very crazy. The song is just great.
I don't.
And it's on an album that wasn't really that big. It really wasn't.
You know, I've talked to people on my podcast who appreciate music like I do. I think everybody I've talked to does. And it's just, I can close my eyes and see that evening and see that time period in my life when I was 21 years old. And, again, like I said, Dream Team, Olympics, late July, 92. And this song I'm blasting. And one of the other things I was blasting that night would have been something coming up in the next pod. But like, it's just great. And I don't have as much a love for the album entirely as you do. But not like, it's funny because that one has 21.9 streams. There's another one that I didn't put on my list that has 135 million streams, and I don't remember it at all.
Is it Baby Don't Cry or Beautiful Girl?
Beautiful Girl.
Beautiful Girl is a phenomenal song.
Yeah.
And that actually would be what I would consider a hit. I wouldn't even call that an other because it was big. Like, it was probably, Not Enough Time wasn't a huge hit, I don't think, at the time. I think Heaven Sent and Beautiful Girl were the two that I would deem to be hits off of this.
And I still would have had MTV access to it because Rhonda would have been in the apartment. She'd have been a year away from graduating from college. And I don't even remember Not Enough Time having a video.
It did. It has a cool video. It's
Is there underwater?
Yes, there's water. It's black and white. He's got really long hair. It's got like a slow-mo feel. Yeah.
So I don't remember Beautiful Girl entirely. Maybe
it was the first time that whole like Christina Aguilera type video happened where they showed a bunch of not so pretty girls and people and made it about you're still beautiful anyway. That was like one of those first times that someone.
I don't remember it. I had Taste It.
Taste It is my favorite song other than Not Enough Time. That song is phenomenal.
It's a good song. That's 7 million streams. And then All Around is
All Around, great tune. The Wishing Well is one of my favorites, and that probably goes back to seeing them live.
We're not talking about Trans.
No, this isn't TTD. This is a different one. And I think it goes back to the seeing them live because the 2 times I saw them that year, it had this cool as hell period in the concert where it would go dark and come back. It had, I think, so it's funny how you kind of get like a different feel. Probably you with Not Enough Time. Would you have loved the song anyway? Yes, right. But if it doesn't take you to a time, maybe you don't love it as much. And that was the same kind of thing. So I had All Around down as well too. And that's funny. And Baby Don't Cry I had too because it was a very different kind of song for them, not normal.
And that was the beginning of advertising using songs. I don't remember, but I just know I got a single with a 12-pack of Coke.
Which is really interesting because at this point, X had happened. They aren't as big as they were. So what made them choose INXS, Not Enough Time, to be what they put out with that?
Yeah, I love that song so much.
It's so good.
That is one of my favorite songs. Full Moon and Dirty Hearts. Mm-hmm. I don't have anything on that necessarily. It's not because it's bad. I want to know what you think.
Okay, so this is 93. So they just got done with an album that I still felt was great. Big letdown to me. And this is why I said, I think I mentioned, even though we didn't get into it, Cradle to Grave. INXS is the epitome of a Cradle to Grave band. Beginning is very much toddler-esque, not that great. They're figuring it out. And then I feel like they're getting old and they're dying and they don't remember what they did that made it work.
Right.
Like, there's still some gems. The Gift is my favorite song off the album.
Million.
It is a cool tune, had a cool video, but other than that, and them doing a cool, Cut Your Roses Down was the other song I really like off that album. Other than that, them doing a cool thing with Ray Charles, that was kind of neat to do a song with Ray Charles and do a video. But this was like the beginning of, I'm not liking where the band's heading.
Right.
What I like, but there's too many I don't like. And it was starting to be the beginning of the end. A lot of what he's going on in his life, a lot of that has to do with what I think where everything was heading, and there wasn't quite as much. I don't want to say the word effort, but it just wasn't as good as it was.
Yeah, it was a time period that they weren't. Again, we said music was changing, and it wasn't.
93 is a big time in music.
Yeah, they really didn't fit in with what was out there and what was we were seeing on MTV. So then their 10th album, Elegantly Wasted, came along. I only picked one. The title track was the one that stuck out to me.
Right.
I don't remember it. I don't remember that album. I don't remember anything about them.
I wouldn't bought it. Yeah, the first song, like you said, Elegantly Wasted was released. It was a solid tune. It's a good song. It's a good video. He looks rough. He looks like he's not happy in life. Just in the video, he looks just. And the rest of the album is very mid. I mean, the whole thing is okay. It's not horrible. It's not great. It's funny when I said the cradle to grave thing. Their grave period is still better than their cradle period.
Right.
But it's still you can see that they're heading in a direction that is not positive. And there's 4 years in between those albums too, and so he's going through a lot tumultuous time in his life, and then shortly thereafter this he dies. So.
Yeah, and we're not going to even bring up the album that they put out after he had passed when they got another singer. Not that doesn't work, but it didn't work, and it wouldn't work in this situation at all. You mentioned before when we were talking about we would be remiss if we didn't mention the song from the Lost Boys soundtrack.
Yes, Good Times. It's with Jimmy Barnes, which I don't know anything else by, but his voice is pretty cool in that song. Yeah. But that song is phenomenal. It's the best song on the Lost Boys soundtrack, which was a huge, obviously, movie in our youth. Very cool movie. And that song was extremely cool. It's weird that it was the same year as Kick, and it doesn't seem to quite get the push that. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that didn't hurt the song being bigger, right? But it wasn't really talked about that this was the year of INXS, and they also had this song on the Lost.
That song's
soundtrack.
Amazing. Yeah, it really is. That's one of the best songs they had anything to do with.
Yep.
So if you are listening to this, hopefully you've taken notes and you know what you're going back and listening to. INXS, great 80s band. You mentioned podcast idea that, Hall of Fame.
Yes, it angers me that they're not in the Hall of Fame.
How are they not in the Hall of
Fame?
Fame?
It goes back to what it is with like all Hall of Fames. It's extremely subjective, obviously, but like I don't know how they don't. Kick alone has to put them in a conversation, and then the music that they made around that. Why are they not there? While some of the bands that we know are there are there.
Yeah, it's one of those things you look at. You're like, this list of people who are in here, or when they got in, or how long it took them.
Because isn't it like 30 years? And so we're looking at this, and INXS has been making music for 44 years ago. So it's not like they're not a first ballot. They're also not like a 10th ballot. Come on.
Yeah, it's silly.
And Depeche Mode got in, a band we both love. Yep. And similarities, just as much.
Right.
Great music. I mean, I don't know.
That's true. So if you're listening, I hope, again, go listen to these things. Good music. A lot of good 80s music in this. I say at the end of these, Chad, thanks for sitting in on this.
You're welcome. Thank you.
You're the guy to be in on some of these discussions. Life is good. Don't ever forget that. Find something to be positive about. We'll see you.